Alors, sans plus tarder, j'aimerais vous présenter nos partenaires de la session. Premièrement, LCG Solutions, c'est un partenaire de longue date de la section Montréal du IBA. Et M. Louis-Charles Gauthier, je crois qu'il est avec nous aujourd'hui. Je crois qu'il est là.
Bonjour.
Alors, bonjour Louis-Charles. Merci d'être là et merci pour nous appuyer tout au long de ces dernières années. Alors, LCG Solutions a été fondée en 2007 et c'est une société spécialisée dans les domaines de l'analyse d'affaires, de la gestion de projets et de l'architecture d'entreprise. Et LCG Solutions est également reconnue par les IEBA comme un Endorsed Education Provider. Alors, merci beaucoup, Louis-Charles Gauthier, président de LCG Solutions, d'être avec nous aujourd'hui et également de nous appuyer dans nos sessions.
Toujours un plaisir.
Également, j'aimerais vous parler de l'autre partenaire qu'on a aujourd'hui, c'est l'École d'éducation permanente de l'Université McGill. Je crois que Ina Popova-Roche aussi est avec nous aujourd'hui. Ina est la directrice de la formation professionnelle et en entreprise. Et l'École d'éducation permanente a été établie en 1968 comme le Centre d'éducation continue. Et aujourd'hui, elle compte plus de 15 000 étudiants inscrits à différents cours, dont le cours de perfectionnement professionnel en analyse d'affaires. Et également, l'école offre un certificat en analyse des données d'affaires. Alors, très à propos pour aujourd'hui. Ina, est-ce que tu es avec nous aujourd'hui? Je pense que oui. D'accord, peut-être un peu plus tard. Pour vous rappeler le calendrier des événements, aujourd'hui, évidemment, on va avoir notre BA très, très populaire, Alex Velasquez. Bonjour, Alex. Et il va nous parler de son expérience dans le domaine de l'analytique des données d'affaires. Sa conférence sera en anglais, mais vous pouvez poser des questions justement en anglais et en français également. Et c'est qui Alex? Mais Alex est notre spécialiste d'aujourd'hui. Comme vous voyez, il y a beaucoup de lettres après son nom. Et la raison pour cela, c'est que Alex, il a été le premier analyste d'affaires au monde ayant obtenu 5 certifications du IEBA, une après l'autre. Il a commencé avec la première Agile Analyst Certification et il a continué tout ça. Il a obtenu le ECBA, le CCBA, le CBAP et dernièrement la certification en Business Data Analytics. Alors, le premier au monde d'avoir obtenu ces 5 certifications-là, Alex, c'est vraiment très notable, mais ce qui est plus intéressant, c'est qu'il a fait tous ces 5 certifications en 427 jours. Et si vous avez déjà eu l'expérience de passer ces examens-là, ce n'est pas évident. Alors, bravo, Alex. On a vraiment hâte de t'entendre. Et encore une fois, si vous avez des questions pour Alex, s'il vous plaît, les écrire dans le chat. Et à un moment donné, je dirai à Alex quelles sont les questions qui rentrent. Encore une fois, en anglais ou en français. Alors, Alex, the floor is yours.
Sounds good. Thank you. So I'm just going to take over the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So as always, thank you guys. Thank you, Dulce and Yves, for allowing me to kick off the session. I was quite flattered. And thank you to everybody in the audience. I know you're giving up your lunch hour to listen to this. So hopefully we learned something about at least my own experience and how I relate business data analytics to my role as right now I'm a consultant. Before we begin, I'll start with just a little bit about myself. I've been doing this for about 12, 13 years. I started as a developer kind of into a systems analyst, now a business analyst, kind of transitioning into business architect, project manager. And we know that organizations expect us to do all of them, wear all of those hats at once. I've been in Montreal, Quebec for about 5 years now. I was working from home in Alberta. And I just said, you know what, you can live anywhere in Canada. So just pick the coolest place that you can find. I do a lot of Latin dancing, and the best teachers in Canada are here. And so I moved myself here. I thought by the 4th year, I'd already be fluent in French. And it's a lot harder than I ever imagined it to be. I find data analytics a lot easier than learning a new language. So maybe one day, I'll give one of these in French, but I'm not there yet. If anybody is learning English, I 100% get how difficult it is to learn a new language at this state of this chapter in our life. So I get it. We'll move forward in English today. And as always, thank you guys. All right, so I'm gonna start off how it is that I got to be in this position, to be sharing my experience. I've told this story a few times, and it's a good story, and it's a funny one. And I do believe that one of the key characteristics of a business analyst is being able to tell a good story, to be able to relate to your audience and to capture their interest. So when I first got here to Montreal, I was given a client, and they're a very big client. And what the nature of their company is they're in retail. They sell products, and what they do is they buy other companies and they consolidate their products. And last I was with them, they were at about 9 companies that they had already purchased. And my role was to help consolidate all of that data, which was about 300,000 products at that time. So I definitely I wasn't there yet to be able to manage a project of that size, right? Because the stakeholders were spread out all across Canada. My team was spread out all across Canada. And I didn't have the formal training to take on that kind of a role. So the first few months, I did okay. The next few months, I could tell maybe I'm not qualified for this, but I'm still hanging in there. And the last few months, things went really downhill. It was definitely a low period in my career. Project was over budget. The project was late. The stakeholders weren't happy. I'm incredibly, incredibly lucky that my employers are very, very wise. And the owners of my company came down to join me, and they guided me through the process to get everything finished up and, you know, get everything back on track. They sat me down and they said, you know, you have the personality to be a good business analyst, but you just don't have the formal skill set and you don't have that formal training, and it's caught up to you. So we recommend you take some courses. Okay, you know, you don't have to tell me twice. So I went to Google and, you know, you search up business analysis courses, and McGill, you know, of course, McGill has that strong name beside it. And at the time it was Bob and George. And I'm like, well, you know, yeah, they seem very qualified. Okay, let's try that route. And day one, you start understanding what it means to be a formal business analyst, right? It's not enough to wing it or to be very clever. You need those techniques, and you need that language and that formal way of doing things. And that's what kind of set off this different direction in my career, where I now have the confidence to share my experiences and to go into really, really large projects and help facilitate that in the right direction. So that was the game changer. George is in the audience now, and I always pay my respect to George, because absolutely, where I was then, maybe junior intermediate, to now, I consider myself, you know, senior, getting to ninja level. It's drastic how much change has happened in such a short amount of time. While I was in that class, and I'll never, this is another good story. I remember walking into class, and George has that music that he plays to welcome everybody into the class. It's some nice piano music. Everybody sits down, and you see he's got a grin on his face. And he goes, "Guys, how was your weekend? Did you guys get up to anything interesting?" everybody's, you know, I was on the terrace this weekend, had a couple of drinks, or I saw a movie, or I was on Saint Laurent and there was a good show. And he goes like, okay. Well, one of your fellow students got an IIBA certification on the weekend. I remember being in shock. I remember being, how is that even possible? Because he has a full-time job. He, you know, is in this class with us. He's always in a great mood. So he's obviously got a great social life. And somehow he got an IIBA certification. And that was the connected out moment for me that if he can do it, I can do it. And because I'm just very competitive by nature, I just started down that path. I took one to take the next, to take the next, to take the next. And at some point, I think I was the second person in the world to have done that. And the CBDA was one of them. And that was one of the more difficult exams. And if you have questions about how to prepare for that, absolutely, I can help you. But the point of today is to use that material, how I use that material and that thinking to that apply to my current roles. I thought I was a business data analyst, but after that course, I realized yet again, you know, there's a lot more out there. There's so much more techniques and there's so much more structure out there that if you can apply that to your role, it takes your thinking to that next level. As always, the disclaimer moment, all of this is just my opinion. And sometimes that doesn't always align with other business analysts. And that's what I love, is that this community is very open and listening, and everybody has their own approach to their roles in data analytics as well. And this is just my opinion. So it's not to say that, well, Alex said that he does this over there, so we should do that over here. Absolutely not. Every organization functions a little bit different. This is how I approach it. And if that works for you, then of course, take the bits and pieces that are the most value to you. Now, the CBDA breaks out into these domains. Identify the research questions, source data, analyze data, then interpret and report the data. Where I see the most value personally is using the results to influence decision-making. I think that absolutely is our bread and butter as business analysts, as facilitators, as beacons of change to help with that decision-making. What I love about business data analytics is that it doesn't matter who is in the room, who has the stronger opinion, because the more clients that I work with, organizations that I work with, the common pattern that I see is that projects are guided by those with strong opinions or more seniority. What I love about data analytics is that it's not fake news. I don't need a strong opinion. I just put it in front of my stakeholders. This is the story that data is telling us. This is what we predict. If we go this route, this is what's going to happen. And you see results, right? But it's not opinion-based. It's evidence-based. And that's a game changer in our career as facilitators, because you don't need a very strong voice, or you don't need to speak over each other to facilitate, to guide a project a certain way. It's evidence-based direction. And then at the end, we'll talk about that guiding that organizational strategy. So this idea of before, during, and after, what amazes me is the objectives, right? So analytics starts with a definition of the objective, then the research question is formulated based on the business objective. A common pattern I see when I get sent to organizations and I'll get put on a project, if I'm lucky, I'll be on the project from the beginning, but usually I'm on a project and it's already maybe halfway through, 3/4 way through, and I'll sit down with the stakeholders and I'll say, what is it that you're ultimately trying to achieve with this project? What is the business objective? And I'll ask one person and they'll give me their objective, and I'll ask the next person and it's slightly different. By the time I get to the third, the fourth, the fifth, they all have a different interpretation of what that business objective is. And that becomes very difficult to then group everybody together and work towards a common goal. The research question is great at clarifying that scope, because it's a very specific question that you want answered. So one that I used recently, should the business move forward with launching this product in order to meet the annual revenue targets? It's very, very, very specific. And what I understand that different business units all have different objectives they want to meet. It's a very, very, very clear goal. And I use that research question to break down the scope. Projects with large organizations, so many moving pieces, there's change. We all know we're in this business. I use those research questions to keep a very, very, very clear direction. When you're identifying those research questions, the CBDA or the IIBA material breaks it into these 4 kind of areas of analytics, and it does absolutely help to think this way. We'll start with descriptive, which is the kind of the most common or maybe the easiest to work through. Your stakeholders are just asking you for a description. So what is our highest selling product? What are our revenues this year? What are our losses? They're just looking for a story of their data, but nothing more, which is very hard because I'm sure we're all looking to solution and make recommendations. We should do this, but that's not what the stakeholder asks for. They're just asking for a story of their data. So narrow your scope to just the descriptive piece of it. Predictive is when exactly that likelihood of future outcome. An example I use here that a lot of people can relate to is cross-selling. So when you go on Amazon, I do a lot of boxing. So for example, I go and I buy my boxing gloves and it says, Alex, you might also like, you know, it's got the helmet, the mouth guard, the tie wraps, the shirt, whatever it is. It turns out I actually do want those things. That in our world is kind of predictive algorithms, right? Using what it's already know to then make predictions on the future. Very, very powerful stuff in our industry. The diagnostic is why. Why is it that our product isn't selling? Why is it that our website isn't getting enough hits? Why is it that customers who walk into the door aren't purchasing? That's that type of analysis. And prescriptive kind of is a combination of that what, when, and why. But here, your stakeholder wants a recommendation, right? They want you to come up with this problem, but also make a recommendation. So very, very specific. This, I would say, is fundamental in business data analytics, not only to apply your organization, but if you're interested in taking that exam, this is a core principle you will see throughout the whole area. Then you move into sourcing data. Now, this, I will admit, is my least favorite part of any analytics project because a lot of it is out of our control. So we're very reliant on our IS groups, our IT groups, our customers sending us data. You're very reliant on things that are out of our control. And I'm sure this is something that a lot of us can relate to. Organizations have vast amounts of data from disparate sources and hence different format. On every project, I'll be asked to do analysis. Say, what is our, show us how this product is doing relative to all the other products. So I sit down with my solution architects and my data architects. And I say, show me where I can pull this data. And I'll say, okay, well, that sales data is over here. But then we write a nightly process and a bunch of calculations. So actually, this is the number that you want over here. But don't forget that this process over here and this view has this data over here. And then lastly, the business doesn't trust any of this. So they have their own spreadsheets where they keep their data. And then good luck with that. That's, I would say, one of the fundamental challenges is the quality of the data, the structure of your data. I will come back to address how I approach this because it's something that's a common pattern that you'll see on engagements. We require effective data management, and effective decision making requires accurate data. Whenever I encounter these kind of problems, we always hear the garbage in, garbage out. I just say, look, garbage in leads to garbage decision making. It's that simple. An example, on a recent engagement, I was asked to kind of understand a specific business area and a specific product line. And so I did. I went in and I said, wow, what really stands out here are the revenues, the gross versus the net revenues. And I don't think people quite understand really how how well this product is doing in the market. So I put together my beautiful crisp reports. I've dotted every I, crossed every T, I've submitted it forward. Everyone's very happy. And then an auditor gets their hands on it and says, this is blatantly incorrect numbers. Where did you get these values? And it was just this big mess, and it really reflected poorly on all of us. And I accepted fault. I said, okay, well, I should have reconciled those numbers, but I trusted the data coming out of this system. So that's just a caution, right? As always, verify those numbers, because it reflects poorly on us if we're trying to make decisions on data that just was blatantly incorrect. If the data is not useful in answering the research question, find the right data, right? And how I address this is I just pulled the subject matter experts into a room, the people who use this on a daily basis, and I just get them to explain to me the structure, right? So an architect says this, so I get it, okay, that makes sense. But the people who are actually using the data, the people who actually are using this in and out as part of their role, I get them to tell me where the data is. And that opinion I trust, because they're doing this day to day. They know it very, very well. So I get those people in a room with your architects, and I very politely say, if you want to make valuable decisions based on your data, we need to take a step back, and you need to organize this structure, right? Make sure you have very clean inputs to your data. When your customers are sending your data in all these different formats, what we need is a very structured format, right? I need a way to be able to say to the executive management, this is the current situation. You can't be giving me all these different formats or this incorrect data, or tell me to go down this area to find this data. We're very reliant on our IS teams and our IT teams. And there's a very polite way to say, guys, we need to have this structured in a very, very specific way. That takes facilitating as a BA. But if we want to do this right, the data needs to be right. And as always, remember, the focus of any project must be to meet the stated business objectives rather than to make the data. This is something that I struggle with, right? As soon as I see this, I want to say, guys, you need to clean this up, clean this up, clean this up. But at the end of the day, that also wasn't the objective. The objective was to meet the business needs, and the objective wasn't this big data cleanup strategy. So it's always that right balance, but absolutely. Sourcing data, in my opinion, is probably the biggest challenge in all of this. Then you move into analyze data, right? And this is our bread and butter as analysts. When I start a new data analytics project, I don't pretend, or I don't even try to sort through this gargantuous amount of data and try to understand a new business area. I go right to my subject matter experts, and usually I'll do a brainstorm session where I get everybody to fill out sticky notes to help explain to me what all of this means. I don't shyly sit in my room and try to sort out this huge, problem. I go straight to my subject matter experts because that's what they're for. And what I like is that business analysts, we're facilitators, right? We're not expected to be subject matter experts. We're not expected to learn a whole business domain overnight. That's what subject matter experts are for. I engage them early, absolutely. And assess the analytical results with respect to the business requirements. Sometimes when I'm sifting through incredible amounts of data, I feel like a detective, right? I'm just uncovering things that I'm sure nobody has noticed. But that is very easy to derail a project from its objective. Especially early in my career, I would find things that I said, well, that can't be right. And then I would show that to a sponsor, and it would take the project in a completely different direction, just trying to put out fires. It's okay to bring that to people's attention, but I find just stick to the objective that you are asked to do. Yes, there's probably surprises in your data that other people aren't aware of. Those are separate projects, and those aren't within your scope. I make a point to stay on my straight and narrow, because I also have an objective to have this analytics project done by this time, by this budget. So I don't need those kind of derailments at this stage. Leverage sampling techniques. This is something that the material emphasizes, absolutely, is because you have vast amounts of data, 300,000 products, use samples that are representative of those products. So for example, random products. The company wanted to know what is the state of the quality of our data. And yes, there are tools out there to show you kind of the points in 300,000 SKUs. But ultimately what we did was we pulled random samples. We pulled 50 random samples from the different products, and we used that sample to tell us, make approximations on the data quality of the larger, right? That's something that the CBDA promotes, and I've started using that, and it's actually very powerful, and it's actually accurate. These ideas of systematic, stratified cluster. Systematic just means that maybe every 1,000 SKU or every 2,000 SKU, you pull out systematically, whereas random, you just grab whichever. You have a very systematic approach at sampling your data. And stratified, an example is voters. Like you want to understand the voting patterns of a specific region. So you'll pull a sample of females between the age of 30 to 40 who are married. What are their voting decisions? That's what stratified is. And then this idea of cluster, you have different stratas, you have different demographics of people, and you pull a little bit from each, and then you make an observation there, and then you can make a conclusion based on your larger population of data. That kind of thinking I didn't have in my toolbox until I took on this knowledge area, and it started broadening my thinking. And as well, tool sets. I'm sure we all use the pivot tables, the bar charts, the column charts, the pie charts. Those are always like, you know, the base, our go-tos. But I started understanding these different ways of visualizing data. And especially if you're interested in that exam, you'll really need to broaden your tool set when it comes to charting data. One that I use often is a control chart. So my role, and as I'm sure most of your roles are, is processes, right? Defining processes, quality of processes, lean processes. And what I promote now is a way to measure those. So in my job, I know the starting point of when a process starts, and I have a way for the systems to have a log, an audit of when that process starts. Then the process goes through, and then it finishes, much like at a Tim Hortons when they're monitoring the drive-through of when the customer makes that order to by the time he gets that order to the time he drives out. I use that same kind of approach to monitor the process that we've designed and to show that it works. So we can come up with an average time of when that process should work. That's the mean here. Then you use math to decide what the business decides is an upper control limit and a lower control limit. If at any point in time in that process, something threw it off out here that it's technically out of control, then this is something that needs to be addressed. But this kind of thinking wasn't in my toolbox. This could not have been done through a pie chart or a column chart. So these kind of control charts. For a business analyst, I find this kind of thinking is very, very, very powerful stuff. All that to say is, in analytics, you'll have to take your thinking a little step higher. At least I did. Interpret and report your data. Something I see people do that could be improved, at least that I've had to improve, is cater to your audience, especially your executives, right? So many times I've seen people, and I used to do this, I would create this perfectly Excel spreadsheet that's been calculated perfectly with all these numbers that I thought people want to see. And you put this in front of executives and their eyes are just like, you know, what is this? Executives especially are so far detached from the day-to-day that their decisions they make at their level are organizational strategy, right? So they're very disconnected and they rely on their resources to know those details, but don't put those details in front of executives. And as my role has become more senior, that's something that I've absolutely learned. So I will work with our IT groups, our business analysts, and I will consolidate that data, but I always just create a very, very, very high level summary. Their time is incredibly valuable, right? And they're making decisions at a company level. So really, really summarize your analytical results. Never, ever, ever underestimate the power of visuals. So right off the bat, you saw this diagram. and you said, okay, this is about sales, right? This whole presentation is about increasing sales. You could have had a chart with hundreds of rows of numbers to tell you the same thing. A visual got you there in half a second, right? So never, never underestimate the power of visuals. Sometimes I'm always like, well, should I do that? And every time that I do it, I see people's brain cricking right away, right? So a picture says 1,000 words is 100% accurate. And leverage some of the techniques. Example is Gestalt principles. This is a concept I hadn't even heard. And as I was studying it, I said, why on earth would this be involved in a data analytics type of area? This is Gestalt. So this is very, very cool. These are the 7 Gestalt principles. And what Gestalt principles are teaching us is how the brain interprets images and is using psychology. And this, I can tell you for certainty, in data analytics is taking your thinking to the next level. For example, continuity. You've already made the connection looking at this that C somehow is going to relate you to D, but you have no idea what these concepts are, but these dots, because they're just strategically placed this way, have taken you here. Can everyone still hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Very well.
Okay, I just got a note that said my connection is unstable.
Oh.
Okay, I'll
No, we
keep
hear
going.
you.
Okay. So all that to say is these little dots have somehow connected you C to D, but we really have no idea if there's any correlation there, but our mind just interprets that way. And that's what Gestalt is saying, is that your brain, your eyes are going to follow the smoothest path. And this is a concept that I use now. If I want my business to come to this conclusion, I will tell the story of, we made this decision to lead you here, but ultimately what I'm going to get to is here. And it's quite amazing that how well the eyes really do follow the smoothest path. So I absolutely use these concepts in my analytics presentations. Same with proximity. We literally have no idea what these dots represent, but because we've put this spacing here, we've already said, okay, well, these are 3 different groups. That's amazing that your brain has already made that interpretation. So if I need to make specific observations or conclusions, I just kind of do a small separation, and the business has already said, okay, well, these kind of groupings must be going together because there's a small space between them. We literally have no idea what these dots represent. But Gestalt principles teach us that. That is next level thinking, right? It's using psychology of how the human brain interprets images. Very, very powerful stuff. And I've started incorporating this kind of thinking into my analytics. Use results to influence decision-making. Now, this is our bread and butter as business analysts, keeping in mind that it's human nature to naturally resist change. As BAs, we already know this. But what I always find humorous about this is that I'm a BA, my whole role is to facilitate change. But if you come into my life and you try to change my own patterns, I cannot stand it, right? I have a system that works, so please don't change it. And here I am trying to tell people in their organizations, well, you should probably change those things. So this is obviously easier said than done. The challenge with data analytics is that it's natural tendency for stakeholders to trust intuition and experience, right? There's people who have been doing this 20, 30 years, their entire life, and it works, right? So who am I to tell them that it's different? The only difference in the toolbox is that we have the evidence to prove it, right? I have this data here that tells a specific story, and I understand that you're used to doing things a certain way, and that works, I get it, but this isn't fake news, right? This isn't CNN versus Fox. Everybody has a different opinion. It's factual. This is what it is. And it's quite amazing that I've been in meetings where everyone's sharing their opinion, and I say, can I share my screen for 2 seconds? And I'll put it out there in silence. And everyone's just like, oh, like this is what the data is telling us. And it's a lot easier to facilitate that way. And I said, we tried this approach and these were the results. And now we're trying this approach and this is the results. So it's a lot easier to maneuver things and facilitate that way with that evidence-based in your toolbox. And as a trusted advisor, you need to facilitate the shift in thinking. So this is something you have to do as a BA anyway, but now you have the data supporting your direction and helping you guide that project the way you want it to go. And leverage data storytelling. Everyone loves a good story, and just provide a narrative and provide context, right? A dashboard, a powerful one, a powerful analytics model is good. If you can add that, a good context and a good story behind it and say, this is where we started, this is where we're going, this is where we'd like to get to, that's powerful stuff, right? And that, in my experience, has been a game changer in terms of facilitating that direction. To obtain stakeholder buy-in on analytics project, use an adaptive approach and potential quick wins. That's something we can do as BAs anyways, but my point here is that data analytics makes it easier. So we've started with this base and we made these decisions. Then you run the results again, and now you can see your results right away. And those quick wins and say, oh, okay, this is actually working, and just baby steps along the way. But you can actually see the results. Whereas before, it's a lot opinion-based, where we would say, I think it's working, or, you know, this should work. That's out the window now. It works or it doesn't, and the data is telling you. Engage your stakeholders more frequently and effectively, especially those negatively impacted. A common mistake I see at organizations is, if you know if somebody is going to try to block that idea, or they're going to speak against it, just don't invite them to the meeting, and we'll make those decisions and we'll tell them later. And how well does that work out, right? Then it just, this just gets even more difficult. Make a judgment call to include anybody who's going to be negatively impacted early, and just build that collaboration, right? And include them in the solution and the design. Absolutely. Anybody who's going to be negative impact, get them on board right away, and they're going to help you. And understand the root causes. If somebody is negatively impacted by this, there is a reason, right? They don't just get out of bed saying, oh, I'm going to block that project this morning. There's fundamental root causes. And as BAs, that's our role. And data analytics helps that, right? If they say, well, you know, this is complicating our business processes because of this. So now, okay, so I'll trace it through, and I'll say, oh, wow, you know, it gets really busy at month end. And this proves it, right? Because revenues, or you need reporting, whatever it is, okay, that actually makes sense to me. So what can we do differently to get you on board? It's quite amazing how well that works. Just simple common sense is just make sure we're all collaborating together, proactively address the people who will be impacted by the change. Systems thinking is something that I've had to take a step back and be better at. If you're going to market yourself as a business data analyst, you're already expected to have this: communication, trustworthiness, adaptability. That's already in your tool set as a BA. But systems thinking, what I like about this is you think holistically and you think methodically. And I see these projects as a chessboard, and I'm very strategically moving pieces, knowing where my end game is. But that systems thinking and having the data to prove your results is crucial. I would say that every step along the way, we made this change and these were the results, and the data is telling this way. If the data is telling us something else, then we're probably going to have to change directions. But it's very evidence-based. But I already have envisioned the end goal, and I very systematically move there using the data-based results to get us there. Absolutely. Systems thinking is crucial. You want to understand the people, the process, and the technology as a whole, right? Remember to think holistically, not short-term wins. Those are great to get you started, but make sure you're looking at all of this holistically. I find the people who can look at projects, data analytics holistically, are then put in those senior roles to be making those bigger decisions. So absolutely to your advantage. And then last but not least, you want to guide that organization level strategy. So a common mistake that I make, and even putting together this presentation as a reminder, that we've made these analytics and it's gone live and we had a good celebration and we're done. But then we didn't actually monitor, right? We didn't actually have a plan in place to monitor the performance. All we've done is gone to the next project and forgotten all about this one. So sustainability is something that the IIBA through the CBDA really, really promotes, right? Make sure you're actually measuring your results. Post-deployment activities are often forgotten. That's very, very true. Just make sure that once deployed, those models that you said that it would work this way, have a plan in place to measure those. More often than not, that ball is dropped. I'll be the first to admit that I'm guilty of that. Decide how the use of the analytical results will be monitored, and continual usefulness, and just how long. I would say here, I would say have a plan in place that we have a very set timeline. So we're going to evaluate the results of this for 8 months, and then we're going to revisit that decision, just have that in writing, and we're all in agreement that that's the process we're going to do going forward. Before I move on to the educational, does anybody have any questions on these side of things? Actually, I'm just going to power through the last 2 points, just looking at the time. If you're interested in the exam, I know that the IIBA has this material in here, but this is just a starter. Like, it's very general overview. The exam is very, very hands-on based. You will need to know all kinds of charts. It is challenging. And this is where I thought I was a business data analyst, not according to the IIBA. It's very, very hands-on techniques, practices, level of understanding, Pareto charts, control charts, be able to read the scatter plot. If you're given this scenario, what should you do in that scenario? It's a challenging exam, I'm not gonna lie. If you need help with any questions on that, feel free to ask. There's this LinkedIn site. Because material is so hard to find, that's a common pattern I hear with this certification. Where do I find material to study? I found this group on LinkedIn. The only challenge is that because the demand is so high, he's started selling his material, and my understanding is now it's pretty expensive. So that's one challenge. I'll admit it's tough finding material for that exam, and it's a tricky one. So make sure you're prepared to take that one. And we said, and right on time.
Yeah, right on time, Alex. And we do have a few questions through chat. So here, I'll start you off on the first one. At the very beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that typically you come into a project about halfway or 2/3 in, and then you talked about discovering the scope. So the question here is, since you're coming in so late in the game, what have the resources been doing if they don't have a specific scope to work with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as a consultant, I'm not thrown into projects that are in good shape. I'm thrown into projects that are usually struggling. They're late and they're over budget, and and this is nobody's fault. It's not as though the resources have been sitting on their butt. It's just projects are so complex nowadays, and there's so many moving pieces, and business changes so fast. Like, it's quite amazing how much change. COVID is a perfect example. There's dynamics that nobody just knew coming, and all of a sudden they threw at us, and we're just expected to magically, shift the direction of this entire big plane into a different direction. Projects aren't that straightforward that you can just say, this is what we had to do. But at some point, you need to take a step back, and bringing an outside perspective, it's always fresh, right? Because you get to ask to say, what is it that you're actually trying to achieve? After a year, people honestly lose sight of that objective, and it takes kind of that outside thinking, that outside perspective to bring things back on track. At least that's been my experience.
Oh, thank you so much. The next question is about reference books. Do you have any favorite reference books on data analytics that you could recommend?
Unfortunately, I do not know. When it comes to reference, I rely on the material that came out of here. I'm sure there's a lot of books out there. but that's another point that when I take on these exams, I use material that's exactly structured to pass these exams. I did that for the CBAP, the CCBA, the ECBA. The BABOK, for example, has an incredible amount of knowledge, and that's what you need to be the best BA out there. But for those exams, I used material that's very specific to pass the exam. If the question is about, are there references out there for data analytics? I'm sure there's many. I only used material specific to pass the exam, which I got through this site.
Thank you so much. Okay, next question is about the fact that sometimes in statistics, the results are different than what was expected. So how do you handle responsibility and accountability when that happens?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. That I'm still learning. So exactly, the data told us we should have done this, and we did that, and that result wasn't expected. You have to be able to change direction. Absolutely. So we just good old-fashioned analytics. We understand the root cause. Why is it that this didn't work as we expected? Real life is going to happen. And if it was as simple as A plus B equals C, we would all do it. But it's definitely not that simple. Real life is going to get in the way. We take a step back, we understand the root cause, and we come up with new direction. The beauty of analytics is that you have results along the way to help you guide you. So you don't have to wait 6 months down the line to say, oh man, we shouldn't have gone that direction. You're constantly getting feedback, right? Evidence-based decisions, be very strategic, I would say. Back to that idea of chess, maneuver very systematically. Mm-hmm. Don't wait till the very end to say, oops, we shouldn't have gone that direction.
Mm-hmm. Very good. There's also a couple of comments here, not questions, but there's a comment here from George to tell us about even within the iiba.org website, there is some reference about essential reading resources for those of us that are interested in going through the certification on data analytics. So thank you, George, very, very much. And also, of course, both our sponsors, both McGill School of Continuing Education and also LCG Solutions, of course, are into the business of training, including data analytics. So also those references are there.
Okay, good to know.
All right. Any other questions for Alex? I think that was it, Alex. Thank you so, so much for your very enlightening presentation. We are so grateful. And you know, I learned a few things about you, even though I've seen you a few times. Not only are you a great, very talented business analyst, but today I learned that you're into boxing and also Latin dancing. So that's talk right. About multifaceted.
That's why I chose Montreal. That's exactly why I chose Montreal.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. And just as a reminder, let me see, I think I should, okay, there it is. So our next session, oh, and we have it there. So next week, we actually have Serge Oligny, who is a senior data scientist. He's going to talk to us about l'analytique des données d'affaires, une science numérique. And so we hope that you join us again next week, same time, same place, to hear another great specialist on the subject of data analytics, l'analytique des données d'affaires. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. À la semaine prochaine.
Bye guys. Ciao, ciao.